As most of us probably already know, the franchise mode of the Madden NFL games has been almost completely stagnant for the better part of the last decade. In fact, for the past 2 years, EA's list of new franchise features has looked more like what we would expect from an October patch, not a full retail release that EA expects us to pay another $60 or $70 for. This complete lack of effort has led to the emergence of the hashtag #FixMaddenFranchise movement on social media, with tweets, Reddit posts, YouTube videos, and so forth, showcasing the practically identical functionality of Madden's franchise mode going back as far as Madden 25, which released in 2013. These social media posts and videos will even highlight the multitude of features that existed in PS2 versions of Madden from 15 years ago, which are absent from recent Madden games with no analogous features to replace them. After a couple years of tanking user scores and declines in critical scores from professional review outlets, and I might have also heard something about declining sales, but I haven't been able to find a source for that, so I don't know, maybe, EA has finally caved to the pressure, and Madden 22 saw the first substantive franchise overhaul in years. A common refrain that I've been seeing from critics this year is that, even though Madden 22 is still not particularly good and the on-field gameplay is some of the worst the series has ever seen, and the franchise mode is still a massive disappointment, but the franchise mode is at least better than it was last year. But here's the thing, is it? Is it really better? You see, I'm not convinced, because even though there are some new features and ideas in Madden 22's franchise mode, and some of them are admittedly actually pretty good ideas, these supposed upgrades have come at the cost of Tiburon removing what was quite possibly the single best idea from recent versions of Madden's franchise mode, a feature that I actually think is one of the best ideas that has ever been included in any football game ever, a feature that is now, as of Madden 22, just gone. Poof. So what are the big new ideas in Madden 22's franchise mode that have some internet critics insisting that the franchise mode is actually better now? Well, Tiburon brought back offensive and defensive coordinators, which is something that many critics have said is the absolute bare minimum of what EA could and should add back into the game. It's also possibly a response to the indie football game Axis Football having a full slate of coordinators and also assistant coaches in its franchise mode. To go along with this alleged emphasis on coaching, Madden 22 includes new game planning and weekly preparation mechanics that replace the previous weekly training feature. You can set the intensity of practice and also select whether to give more reps to starters, to backups, or to split the reps evenly between starters and backups. There's also now a progressive fatigue system in which fatigue supposedly accumulates from week to week throughout this entire season, and high-intensity practices can result in players getting injured in practice and therefore being inactive for games. Okay, well, sure, yeah, this stuff seems to have some promise. Oh, and I suppose there's also a few more storyline scenario events that are pulled from the face of the franchise story engine. You can expect to see a few more press conferences to talk about a breakout performance, or how you want to game plan against an elite X-Factor opponent, or even apparently just to talk to the media about the weather. And there will also be the occasional completely random mini off-field drama to resolve. It's all incredibly shallow, but it's fine, whatever. Having to sit through a long black loading screen just to answer one single media press conference question that only has 2 vague responses for me to choose from isn't exactly going to have people running out to GameStop to pre-order the game in excitement, but again, it's fine. Whatever, it's fine. It's a tiny injection of drama and emergent storytelling added into the game. Really, it's fine. Oh, and I suppose there's also supposed to be a completely new college scouting system that uses regional scouts to evaluate potential draft picks, and which also seems to be copied almost verbatim from Axis Football. But that feature was not included in the game at release and was promised to be added in a post-release content update sometime in September. I'm writing and recording this in the first weekend of October, and this promised scouting feature is still nowhere to be seen, and I'm not aware of any expected release date for it. So, where the heck is it, EA? If you were paying attention to those last few sentences, you may have already figured out where I'm going to be going with this video. One of the features that I mentioned is a revamped weekly game planning feature, which replaced the existing weekly training feature that had been included in previous years' franchise modes for quite a few number of years. I think it goes back to at least Madden 17 or maybe 16. I don't remember exactly which. But this is where I have the biggest problem with Madden 22, because I actually thought that old weekly training feature of the past few years was the single best idea in this generation's franchise modes. Last year, when you would go into weekly training option in franchise mode, you will be shown the offensive and defensive play calling tendencies of your opponent. You'll then be given the option to choose a skill trainer tutorial in order to learn and practice an offensive or defensive play concept that specifically counters one of the opponent's play calling tendencies. Your performance in those playable drills would then determine the amount of experience gained by your players from the practice itself, and also the magnitude of the attribute bonuses that your players will receive in the actual games if you call that particular concept in the upcoming game. Does your opponent run a lot of cover 2? Well, you can run some drills to practice route concepts that beat cover 2. Does your opponent favor zone running schemes? You can run gap control drills on defense to learn how to read these plays and fill the running holes. Does your opponent like to run a lot of screen passes? You can practice cover 2 man, which is a good defensive concept for stopping screen passes, and the skill trainer will teach you what your defensive keys and responsibilities will be when the opponent calls those screen passes against you in-game. You might be wondering, wait, Mega Bears fan, aren't skill trainer drills just glorified tutorials? Are you telling us that you actually liked playing through tutorials inside of your franchise? And the answer is yes, they are glorified tutorials. And yes, not only did I like it, I think it's one of the best ideas that has ever been included in any sports video game ever, period. You see, not only does these skill trainer drills teach Madden's gameplay mechanics, they also teach real-life football concepts. Practicing these skill trainer drills not only helps to make you a better Madden player, but it also potentially helps users to be better students of the game of football itself. It's also a great and clever way to integrate tutorials and practice mode into the franchise mode so that players will actually play it. Most players probably would never bother with the skill trainer drills, even though it's actually a pretty good teaching tool on its own. But by putting those drills in franchise and rewarding the user for playing them to develop their team, Tiburon is encouraging the user to jump right into the game and learn football and Madden as you go. Novice players don't necessarily have to spend the time up front going through all the tutorials before starting up their franchise. You can start your franchise, then spend the preseason and early weeks of the regular season to play those tutorials and get caught up on the game's mechanics and whatever your preferred play concepts happen to be. For intermediate users, these skill trainer drills can serve as decent reminders of how to execute these concepts and can potentially refresh some of your muscle memory when you actually go to practice them.
Listen up, fellas. I think we all know what today was. Today simply wasn't good enough. We have high aspirations as a team. If we want to get there, we got to raise our game. Today was not good enough. Next practice, I want it better.
And for more experienced and advanced users, the drills can be completely skipped, and you'll gain experience and in-game attribute boosts based on your best ever performance in the specific drill. So if you can run the drill once and get a gold medal, you won't ever have to actually play that drill again unless you actually want the practice for yourself. This weekly training feature using the skill trainer is a fantastic teaching tool, and it accommodates users of all skill levels. In addition to the return of offensive and defensive coordinators, one of the most common requests from gamers for a returning feature from old Madden games is to bring back the old training camp drills. You know, the old DB SWAT drill, the pocket presence drill, and Oklahoma drills from, Madden 05, 06, 07? Those drills served largely the same purpose as the skill trainer drills do now, in that they try to give the user a gameplay activity to perform as part of the weekly game prep in franchise, and also to help the user practice and become better at the game itself. But I would go so far as to say that I think that the real-life educational value of the skill trainer makes it a much better playable practice mode compared to those old training camp drills. That being said, I don't see any reason why Tiburon couldn't have just done both. Maybe have the skill trainer drills for your big offensive and defensive scheme game plans, But then also include those position-specific training camp drills for improving the skills of your focus players each week. That way, the user gets more playable activities to perform between actual matches, and their performance in those activities actually influences the development of their player's talent. But in Madden 22's new weekly game planning feature, this skill trainer integration is just gone. The skill trainer tutorials and drills are still in Madden 22, but they are not accessible from within franchise mode. If you decide that you do want to learn how to run, say, an RPO in preparation for your next franchise matchup, you now have to exit out of the franchise and go into the dedicated skill trainer tutorials from the game's main menu. Did Tiburon replace the weekly training with something better, or at least something comparable? Well, here's the big thing. No, they didn't. Instead of being able to learn and practice specific play concepts, pass routes, or defensive coverages, Madden 22 gives you a handful of vague philosophies to game plan. I'm not learning and practicing something like the curl flat pass concept, or whether to bend or bang when running a zone blocking run play, or how to read and beat a cover 3 defense. No. Instead, I only get to choose to game plan for inside running, outside running, blitz counters, or short, medium, or deep passing. Inside and outside running doesn't differentiate between power running, zone running, option, or RPOs. And those differences are only, the basis of the entire offensive and defensive playbooks. It just gives you an attribute bonus whenever you run an inside or outside running play in the upcoming game. The passing game plans don't differentiate between drop-back passing, play action, rollouts, or RPOs. It just gives you an attribute bonus whenever you run a passing play that has a primary read that is of the corresponding depth. Similarly on defense, I'm not practicing different coverages or blitz schemes. No, instead, I only get to game plan around defending the same handful of concepts as the offensive game plans, except that the blitz counters is replaced with containing a scrambling QB. These game plans are so vague that when you get into the actual match and the play calling screens, more than half of the plays in the offensive and defensive playbooks, which are all completely different play concepts, are still considered to be part of whatever game plan you chose and will receive those attribute bonuses. So it barely matters which of these schemes you decide to game plan for on a week-to-week basis. And then the training itself is completely simulated. There's no playable drills to practice any of the selected game plan focuses. Madden 22 doesn't bother to teach the user how to read plays or execute concepts. It doesn't actually make an effort to help you become a better Madden player, and it certainly doesn't bother trying to teach you any actual football. What's especially annoying about all of this is that the new opponent scouting reports in Madden 22 actually do give more detailed situational breakdowns of your opponent's play calling tendencies. Instead of just saying that they run a curl flat concept as their favorite pass concept, as was the case in Madden 21, Madden 22 will actually specify that the opponent specifically favors that curl flat concept on, say, third and medium. But they might be more likely to run something like a drive concept on 1st and 10. So now you, as a supposed coach, are better informed about which play calling tendencies might be more important to counter. Personally, I'd much rather be prepared to stop those third down play calling preferences for my opponent rather than worrying as much about what they'll be running on 1st or 2nd down. Madden 22 even shows you your own team's play calling tendencies, though I'm not sure if this is just a breakdown of the concepts in your playbook or if it's actually representative of what plays you call in actual game situations. Whatever. Anyway, you also have a better idea of which concepts are most common in your own playbook, so that you don't waste a week of training on a concept that you only have in your playbook like once or twice, which was something that I would occasionally do in some of the previous years' weekly training. The skill trainer drills, thus, would be a much better fit for Madden 22's game planning features, so it's even more of a shame that it's just gone. The game planning feature that we have now feels completely dumbed down in comparison. This isn't going to be a very long video, but before I wrap this up, I'd like to remind all my viewers that this content creation is currently ad-free and entirely funded by the generous support of viewers like you through Patreon. I'm currently paying out of pocket for servers and hosting for my personal blog at www.megabearsfan.net, as well as for the software that I use for creating videos like this. The support of patrons helps to offset those expenses. It's also worth noting that I'm close to hitting the threshold for enabling monetization on this channel, but I'd much prefer to remain independently funded and not have to rely on advertising revenue, let alone having to shell out to corporate sponsors. I want to be free to make the content that I want on the schedule that I'm comfortable creating it. I don't want to have to stoop to filling my content with advertisements or to make clickbait fluff pieces to appease corporate sponsors and chase those YouTube algorithms. Your support on Patreon would help me to remain independent and keep these videos free of those annoying ads. So if you don't want to see this time in the video filled with some annoying ad for Raid Shadow Legends or Skillshare or Curiosity Stream or Manscaped or whatever the heck stupid thing they're advertising this week, then please consider supporting my content creation. The link to the Patreon page will be in the description. I also want to add as an aside that I'm very disappointed that Madden 22 replaced drive goals with staff goals. Instead of having dynamic drive goals that give players an opportunity to gain more experience in-game, you get to set a series of game goals for each member of your coaching staff. This reduces the potential for getting experience for players, especially in preseason, which really hurts the development of draft picks and practice squad reserves. I like the idea of being able to set goals for your coaches in principle, but I wish that the drive goals were still there as well to supplement them. Those goals could have been based on the coach's game day goals. For example, if your offensive coordinator's goal is to pass for 275 yards, then your drive goals should focus on completing passes or getting the ball to specific receivers. If your head coach's goal is to win the turnover battle, then you should get drive goals about not turning the ball over on offense or to try to force a turnover on defense. Or if you have a breakout player candidate, you should get drive goals to get the ball to that player more. And so forth and so forth. Maybe you could even script your opening drives and their accompanying drive goals like real NFL offensive coordinators and head coaches do. But nope, drive goals are completely gone and replaced with these static staff goals. And as for the new staff management features in general, they don't even include a special teams coordinator, let alone any of the assistant positional coaches that are included in the franchise mode of Axis Football and which have been included for the past 3 years. The coordinators also don't seem functionally all that different from each other. They don't seem to have any attributes that affect on-field performance of the team, and the coordinators aren't even licensed real-life NFL coaches, they're just random names and faces. All Tiburon did was take the offensive and defensive schemes that you used to just set in a menu and assign randomly generated names to them for you to hire and fire. Because, quite frankly, that's all the coordinators in Madden 22 are, a chosen scheme. They only have a couple of shallow skill trees that offer very little actual customization or specialization, and which, in my experience, often result in only about 4 different actual coach skill sets. So, yeah, EA did put some new stuff in franchise for Madden 22, but in my opinion, these new features are completely limp and shallow and do not make up for the removal of the skill trainer drills, which I, once again, think is one of the best features of any sports franchise or dynasty mode ever. Also, before I go, I'm a firm believer in giving credit where credit is due. So, before this video ends, I do want to talk about the one new feature of Madden 22's franchise mode that I actually do unequivocally like, and which I think is a net positive in the game and isn't replacing something that was better in previous years. And that is the new practice intensity and practice reps feature that is part of the weekly game planning. As I mentioned earlier, you can choose to practice in full pads or in partial pads and can choose whether to give all those reps to starters, give them all to backups, or to split reps between starters and backups. These choices affect who gets experience from practice and also how much experience they earn. Players also now accumulate fatigue over the course of the season and from these practices. So practicing at high intensity every week runs the risk of injuring players in practice such that they are not available to play in the actual games. This is actually a really good idea from Tiburon that gives me a genuine coaching decision to make for a change. Should I focus on giving reps to my starters at a specific position group and then risk an injury to one of those starters? Or should I give more reps to younger reserves and rookies? Does Andy Dalton really need all those practice reps with the starters, considering that he's got plenty of real NFL experience as a starter? Or should I give more of those reps to the rookie Justin Fields in order to get him ready for his inevitable start, whenever that will happen to be in my particular franchise? Being able to set practice intensity is also a mechanic that seems inspired by Axis football. But in this case, the implementation is actually different enough that it doesn't feel plagiarized in the way that the scouting feature looks like it's going to be. It's just genuinely an alternative interpretation of the same basic idea. Neither one is really better or worse than the other. So what do you think? Did you like the integration of skill trainer drills into franchise mode the way that I did? Are you sad to see it gone in Madden 22 the way that I am? Or do you actually like the simpler game planning functionality of Madden 22 compared to previous years? And if so, I'm really curious to hear why. Regardless of how you feel about the game planning in general, do you think that Madden 22's franchise mode is actually a solid improvement over previous years? Or are you like me and see it as more of a one step forward, two steps back kind of situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching.